The familiar scent of leather and success filled the air as Melissa Bennett stepped into the towering glass headquarters of Hamilton Enterprises. 20 years had passed since she'd last seen Linda Hamilton in person, yet here she was, about to interview her old friend for the Wall Street Journal's Women in Business series. The irony wasn't lost on her. Back in high school, Linda had been the quiet one while Melissa commanded attention. Now, Linda's name appeared regularly in Fortune 500 lists, while Melissa fought for every byline. The receptionist's voice cut through her thoughts. "Ms. Hamilton will see you now." As Melissa followed the curved hallway to the executive suite, memories of shared secrets and midnight conversations flooded back. They'd been inseparable once, before life and ambition pulled them in different directions. Linda stood as Melissa entered, her designer suit a sharp contrast to their teenage years of ripped jeans and band t-shirts. "Mel," she said, spreading her arms for an embrace that felt both familiar and oddly formal. "It's been too long." "You look amazing, Lynn," Melissa replied, noting the subtle signs of strain around her friend's eyes. "The company's doing incredibly well from what I hear." "We've been blessed," Linda answered, gesturing to a plush leather chair. "But let's skip the small talk. We both know you're here for the story." Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The interview started smoothly enough. Linda spoke about market expansion, innovative leadership strategies, and the challenges of maintaining a family business in a digital age. But when Melissa mentioned the company's history, something shifted in the room's atmosphere. "The early days were complicated," Linda said, suddenly finding intense interest in her coffee cup. "Every family business has its dark times. Times better left in the past." The warning in her tone was subtle but unmistakable. Melissa's journalistic instincts flared. "Dark times? That sounds intriguing." She kept her voice casual, but her pulse quickened. "Not everything needs to be exposed, Mel." Linda's fingers tightened around her cup. "Some stories are better left untold. For everyone's sake." She leaned forward, lowering her voice. "Remember when we used to protect each other's secrets? That trust meant something." The conversation moved on, but Melissa's mind kept returning to that moment of tension. As she packed up her notes, Linda caught her arm. "It was good to see you, Mel. Really good. But..." She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Whatever story you're thinking of writing, remember our friendship. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed again." Outside, in the fading autumn light, Melissa stood on the sidewalk, staring up at the gleaming tower of Hamilton Enterprises. Her phone buzzed, a text from Josh, her colleague at the Journal. "How'd it go? Get anything good?" She typed back, "Maybe too good. Found a thread I'm not sure I should pull." The response came quickly, "Since when does Melissa Bennett leave a thread unpulled?" As she hailed a cab, Melissa couldn't shake the feeling that she'd glimpsed something beneath the polished surface of Linda's success, something that threatened to unravel not just a story, but the delicate threads of a friendship she'd thought long faded. That night, unable to sleep, she opened her laptop. The cursor blinked accusingly as she typed "Hamilton Enterprises History" into the search bar. She hesitated for a moment, Linda's warning echoing in her mind. Then, with a deep breath, she pressed enter. The first few pages showed nothing unusual: press releases, company milestones, charity events. But on page 6, buried in the archives of a local paper, a headline caught her eye: "Hamilton CEO faces fraud allegations, case mysteriously dismissed." Melissa's heart raced as she clicked the link. Sometimes, she thought, the most dangerous stories are the ones that hit closest to home. The article was dated 15 years ago, its digital scan slightly blurred but still legible. Robert Hamilton, Linda's father, had been accused of orchestrating a complex investment scheme that defrauded dozens of small business owners. The details were damning: forged documents, shell companies, millions in missing funds. Yet somehow, the case had vanished like morning mist, leaving behind only whispers and unanswered questions. Melissa sat back in her chair, the blue light of her laptop screen casting shadows across her home office. Her mind wandered to high school summers spent at the Hamilton house, Robert's booming laugh echoing through their palatial home. He'd always seemed larger than life, generous with both money and advice. Had it all been a facade? The next morning, she met Josh at their usual coffee spot, a worn leather portfolio clutched under her arm. "I need your perspective on something," she said, spreading printouts across the table. "And I need you to be brutally honest." Josh leaned forward, his eyes scanning the documents. 20 years in investigative journalism had left him with a perpetual furrow between his brows and an uncanny ability to spot patterns. "This isn't just a business profile anymore, is it?" "I don't know what it is," Melissa admitted, stirring her untouched coffee. "Linda's my friend. Or was. But if her father's still running schemes, then you have a responsibility," Josh finished. He tapped the fraud article. "These victims, did they ever get justice? No records of settlements. The case just disappeared." Melissa pulled out her notebook, flipping to her interview notes. "When I mentioned the company's history, Linda practically begged me to leave it alone. Said it would destroy our friendship." Josh's expression hardened. Emotional manipulation. Classic tactic when someone's hiding something. Or maybe she's protecting her father. Maybe she doesn't even know the full story. Melissa remembered the strain in Linda's voice, the way her hands had trembled slightly when discussing the past. "There's only one way to find out." Josh pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know someone at the DA's office. The records might be sealed, but paper trails never completely disappear." That afternoon, Melissa found herself in a cramped courthouse basement, surrounded by boxes of case files. Josh's contact, a clerk named Martinez, had been surprisingly helpful. "The Hamilton case," he'd said, shaking his head. "That one still comes up in department meetings. Nobody could prove it, but everyone knew something wasn't right about how it ended." Hours passed as she dug through documents, piecing together a narrative that made her stomach churn. The evidence against Robert Hamilton had been overwhelming. Witness statements, bank records, paper trails leading to offshore accounts. Then, suddenly, key witnesses recanted. Critical documents vanished. The judge, citing lack of evidence, dismissed all charges. But it was a single photograph, tucked into the back of a file, that made Melissa's blood run cold. It showed Robert Hamilton at a charity gala, his arm around the judge who would later dismiss his case. The date stamp was 3 weeks before the dismissal. Her phone buzzed, a text from Linda, "Have dinner with me tonight. Please. We need to talk." Melissa stared at the message, her throat tight. The Linda she knew in high school had been kind, honest, fiercely loyal. What had happened to that girl? Had she been corrupted by her father's influence, or was she trapped in a web of his making? She thought of the victims, small business owners who'd lost everything. Families devastated by one man's greed. The truth needed to come out. But at what cost? Her fingers hovered over the phone's keyboard. Finally, she typed, "Name the place." The response came quickly, "The Gables. 8 p.m. Come alone." The Gables was an exclusive restaurant on the city's west side, the kind of place where deals were made and secrets kept. As Melissa drove there, questions tumbled through her mind. Was Linda going to threaten her? Bribe her? Confess? In her rearview mirror, she noticed a black SUV that had been following her for the last 10 minutes. Her pulse quickened. Just paranoia, she told herself. But as she pulled into the restaurant's parking lot, the SUV cruised past slowly, its tinted windows revealing nothing of its occupants. Inside, the maitre d' led her to a private dining room. Linda was already there, sitting alone at a table set for two. She looked up as Melissa entered, her face a mask of calm that couldn't quite hide the storm beneath. "I know what you found in the courthouse today," Linda said quietly. "But you don't understand. You can't possibly understand what's really going on." Behind them, the door clicked shut with the finality of a judge's gavel. The private dining room at the Gables held the weight of 20 years of friendship and secrets. Melissa studied Linda's face across the table, searching for traces of the girl who once stayed up all night helping her cope with her parents' divorce. That girl had believed in justice, in doing what was right no matter the cost. The woman before her now seemed carved from harder stone. "You think this is simple, don't you?" Linda's voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. "A clear case of right and wrong. Good versus evil. But life isn't a newspaper article, Mel. You can't just divide it into neat paragraphs with a clean conclusion." "Then help me understand," Melissa replied, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Because what I found today. The evidence against your father, the judge's sudden dismissal, the mysterious disappearance of witnesses, it all points to corruption on a massive scale." Linda took a long sip of wine, her fingers trembling slightly against the stem of her glass. "Do you remember my mother's cancer treatment? Senior year of high school?" The question caught Melissa off guard. "Of course. You missed 3 months of school to be with her at Mayo Clinic. What you don't know, what nobody knows, is that we were broke. The company was failing. The treatments weren't covered by insurance, and they cost more than we could ever afford." Linda's eyes grew distant. "Dad did what he had to do. He made choices to save her life. By stealing from other families. Destroying their lives." Melissa leaned forward. "Linda, those people lost everything. And I live with that knowledge every day." Linda's composure cracked slightly. "But it's more complicated now. The company employs thousands of people. We've built something legitimate, something good. If this story comes out, it won't just be my father who pays the price. Families will lose their jobs. Pensions will vanish. Is that justice?" The weight of responsibility pressed against Melissa's chest. She thought of Josh's words about journalistic duty, about truth and consequences. But she also thought about the photo of Linda's mother at graduation, thin and frail but alive, smiling as her daughter received her diploma. "There's more," Linda continued, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Dad's schemes never really stopped. The fraud case was just the beginning. I've tried to clean things up, to redirect the company toward legitimate business, but he still controls everything from the shadows. Every time I think I've contained one problem, another surfaces. Why don't you stop him? Turn him in." Linda laughed bitterly. "You don't know my father like I do. He's got contingency plans for his contingency plans. The moment anyone moves against him, documents will be released, money will be transferred, and everything crashes down. Not just our company, but others too. It would be a domino effect." The waiter appeared with their entrees, forcing a pause in the conversation. Melissa watched Linda methodically cut her steak, each movement precise and controlled, like everything in her life had to be. "I'm trapped, Mel," Linda said finally. "I've spent years trying to protect everyone, our employees, our partners, even our competitors who'd be caught in the blast radius if this all explodes. But maybe." She hesitated, vulnerability flickering across her face. "Maybe I've just been protecting him. Enabling him." Melissa reached across the table, touching Linda's hand. "Let me help you. We can find a way to expose the truth without destroying everything you've built." "Can we?" Linda pulled her hand back. "Because here's what happens next, either you bury this story and betray everything you believe in as a journalist, or you publish it and destroy not just my family, but countless others. There's no middle ground." The sound of footsteps made them both look up. Through the door's window, Melissa caught a glimpse of a tall figure passing by, a man whose silhouette reminded her unervingly of Robert Hamilton. Linda noticed her gaze and tensed. He has people watching me. Always. I wouldn't be surprised if he already knows about your investigation. Then why warn me? Why risk meeting me here? Because despite everything, you're still the friend who held me when I thought my mother was dying. Because I'm tired, Mel. Tired of carrying this weight alone. Linda's eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. But mostly because you need to understand what you're really dealing with. My father doesn't just break laws, he breaks people. The implications hung heavy in the air between them. Outside the private room, the restaurant hummed with the quiet conversations of the wealthy and powerful, all carrying their own secrets, their own justifications for choices made in the name of necessity. Melissa's phone buzzed in her purse. A text from Josh, got something big. Evidence of ongoing fraud. Call me ASAP. She looked up at Linda, who seemed to read the message in her expression. You found something else, haven't you? Linda asked, her voice hollow. Something recent. The choice loomed before Melissa like a crossroads in the dark. Down one path lay professional triumph and moral clarity. Down the other, loyalty and complexity. But perhaps there was a third path, one that wound between truth and compassion, justice and mercy. Meet me tomorrow, Melissa said suddenly. Not as a source, not as a CEO. As my friend. Let's figure this out together. Linda studied her face for a long moment. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed, she said finally. But maybe they can be rebuilt into something different. Something better. As they left the restaurant separately, Melissa felt eyes on her back. In her rearview mirror, the black SUV had returned, following at a discreet distance. Her phone buzzed again with another message from Josh, but she didn't need to read it to know that tomorrow would change everything. The morning light filtered through Melissa's office blinds, casting striped shadows across the documents spread before her. Josh's evidence lay in stark black and white, bank statements, shell company records, a web of financial manipulation that stretched across continents. Robert Hamilton's original scheme hadn't just continued, it had evolved into something far more sophisticated. This goes beyond fraud, Josh said, pacing the small space between her desk and the window. He's been systematically targeting struggling companies, forcing them into debt, then absorbing their assets at pennies on the dollar. The victims aren't just losing money, they're losing their legacies. Melissa traced her finger along a flowchart Josh had created. Each box represented a ruined dream, a shattered future. And Linda's signature is on every major transaction. She's not just covering for him, she's actively participating. The revelation sat heavy in her chest. The photo on her desk caught her eye, her high school graduation, Linda's arm around her shoulders as they both laughed at some forgotten joke. When had her friend become complicit in her father's crimes? Had it been gradual, like water wearing away stone, or had there been a moment of conscious choice? Her office phone rang, startling them both. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. Ms. Bennett? The voice was elderly, trembling with emotion. My name is Edward Reeves. I understand you're investigating Robert Hamilton. Melissa grabbed her notepad. Yes, Mr. Reeves. How can I help you? I owned Reeves Manufacturing until 3 years ago. Hamilton promised to save our company, said he'd keep our workers employed. Instead, he stripped our assets and left 50 families without jobs or pensions. But that's not why I'm calling. He paused, his breathing heavy. It's about Linda Hamilton. She came to see me last month. The pen stilled in Melissa's hand. What did she want? To apologize. She brought documents, proof of what her father had done, not just to my company but to dozens of others. She said she was gathering evidence, trying to make things right. Then yesterday, she sent me this. Melissa's phone buzzed with an incoming email. She opened it to find a scanned letter, Linda's elegant signature at the bottom. It detailed a restitution plan for all of Reeves Manufacturing's former employees. She's been doing this for months, Reeves continued. Quietly contacting victims, arranging compensation. But she's scared, Ms. Bennett. She told me her father's getting suspicious, that she's running out of time. The implications hit Melissa like a physical blow. Linda wasn't just a victim or an accomplice, she was building a case against her own father, piece by careful piece. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," she said, her mind racing. "This helps more than you know." After hanging up, she turned to Josh. "We need to move faster. If Robert Hamilton discovers what Linda's doing." "He already has." Josh's voice was grim as he handed her his tablet. On the screen was a breaking news alert: Hamilton Enterprises announces emergency board meeting, CEO Linda Hamilton faces potential removal. Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Linda, "Dad knows. Meeting in 30 minutes. Whatever happens, publish everything. I'm done protecting him." "This is it," Josh said, already reaching for his coat. "We can have the story ready for tomorrow's edition. All the evidence, all the victims' statements dash." "No." Melissa stood, gathering the documents into her briefcase. "We publish today. Online. If we wait until tomorrow, there might not be a story left to tell." She paused at her office door, the weight of the decision pressing against her shoulders. "Josh, if anything happens to me dash. Already backed up everything to 3 secure servers." He squeezed her arm. "Be careful, Mel. Men like Robert Hamilton don't go down easily." The elevator ride to the Hamilton Enterprises executive floor felt like descending into a storm. Security guards lined the hallway, their faces impassive but their postures tense. Through the glass walls of the boardroom, Melissa could see Linda standing alone, facing a row of suited men. Robert Hamilton sat at the head of the table, his expression thunderous. Linda looked up as Melissa approached, relief and fear warring in her eyes. But before either woman could speak, Robert Hamilton's voice boomed through the open door. "Well, if it isn't the crusading journalist herself. Come to witness the fall of the mighty." His smile was all teeth and calculation. "Linda, is this what betrayal looks like? Conspiring with an old friend to destroy everything we've built?" Linda straightened, something shifting in her posture. "No, Dad. This is what redemption looks like." The room crackled with unspoken threats and decades of power dynamics. As Melissa took her place beside Linda, she realized that some battles weren't about winning or losing. They were about choosing which person you wanted to be when the dust settled. Behind them, the boardroom door clicked shut with the finality of a closing trap. The boardroom air grew thick with unspoken histories and shifting loyalties. Linda stood at the window, watching the city spread out below like a tapestry of lights and shadows. For years, she had viewed this vista as a testament to her father's empire. Now she saw it differently, as a constellation of lives touched by their choices, for better or worse. Robert Hamilton's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp as broken glass. "You think you're being noble, don't you? The prodigal daughter, making amends?" He gestured to the stack of documents before him, Linda's secret restitution plans laid bare. "Do you have any idea what you've done? How many years of careful work you've threatened?" "Careful work?" Linda turned, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Is that what we're calling it now? Not theft, not destruction, not the systematic dismantling of people's dreams?" Melissa watched the exchange, noting how the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. These men had been her father's allies for decades, complicit in their silence if not their actions. But now, confronted with the raw truth of their enterprise, cracks appeared in their carefully maintained facade of ignorance. "Everything I did," Robert's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper, "I did for this family. For you. Or have you forgotten those months at Mayo Clinic? The doctors who suddenly became available when no one else could get appointments. The experimental treatments that saved your mother's life? No. Linda's response carried the weight of years of suppressed truth. I haven't forgotten. But I've finally understood the cost. Not just to others, but to myself. To my soul. She placed her hand on the glass, as if reaching for the city beyond. Each time I signed those papers, each time I looked away from another family's destruction, I lost a piece of myself. And I told myself it was necessary, unavoidable. The price of survival. The room fell silent, the only sound the gentle hum of climate control and the distant pulse of the city below. Melissa felt the weight of her phone in her pocket, knowing that with one call, she could set the story loose into the world. But something held her back, not fear, but recognition. This moment belonged to Linda. The board has already voted, Robert said, triumph creeping into his tone. You're being removed as CEO, effective immediately. Your little crusade ends here. Linda smiled then, a genuine expression that transformed her face. You still don't understand, Dad. This was never about maintaining control. It was about finding the courage to let go. She turned to address the board directly. Gentlemen, before you formalize your vote, you should know that I've spent the last 6 months documenting everything. Every transaction, every shell company, every instance of fraud and market manipulation. I've prepared detailed files for the SEC, the FBI, and yes, the press. Her gaze met Melissa's. My friend here isn't just writing a profile piece. She's breaking open 2 decades of corporate corruption. Robert surged to his feet, his face mottled with rage. You ungrateful dash. I'm also not alone, Linda continued, her voice gaining strength. Remember Edward Reeves? Marcus Chin? Sarah Patel? All those people you destroyed? They're waiting to testify. They have copies of everything. If anything happens to me, if you try to bury this again, it all comes out. Every last detail. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Several members rushed for their phones, while others huddled in whispered consultation with their lawyers. Robert Hamilton stood frozen, staring at his daughter as if seeing her for the first time. Melissa moved closer to Linda, their shoulders touching in quiet solidarity. Are you sure about this? She whispered. Once we publish, there's no going back. Linda reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I've spent 20 years going back, reliving every compromise, every rationalization. It's time to move forward. She turned to face her friend fully. But I need you to understand something. This story isn't just about exposing corruption. It's about redemption, not just mine, but for everyone involved. The truth needs to come out, but it needs to come out right. Outside, the sun broke through the clouds, casting long shadows across the boardroom table. In that moment of clarity, both women recognized the weight of their next decisions. The story they were about to tell would reshape lives, destroy reputations, and perhaps, in its own way, set people free. Robert Hamilton watched them from across the room, his empire crumbling around him, while his daughter stood straight-backed and resolute, no longer a prisoner of his legacy. The choice that had seemed so impossible just days ago now felt inevitable, as natural as breathing. Linda's phone buzzed, a message from her mother. She stared at the screen for a long moment before looking up, tears shining in her eyes but her voice firm. It's time. The story broke on a Wednesday morning, not with thunderous headlines or breaking news alerts, but with quiet, undeniable truth. Melissa's article laid bare 2 decades of corporate manipulation, but it did something more profound. It told a story of transformation, of a woman who chose to break free from the chains of family loyalty to forge her own path toward redemption. Linda watched the sun rise from her mother's garden, the morning dew settling on roses her father had once used to justify his crimes. The financial press was already calling it the scandal of the decade. Robert Hamilton had disappeared the night before, leaving behind only a handwritten note that said, "You've chosen your path. Now walk it alone." Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the article went live. Board members scrambling to distance themselves, lawyers offering representation, former victims expressing gratitude for her courage. But the message that mattered most came from her mother: "I'm proud of you. I've always been proud of you." Inside the house, Helen Hamilton sat in her favorite armchair, looking smaller than Linda remembered yet somehow stronger. "Your father never understood," she said, taking Linda's hand. "The treatments, the money, I would have rather died than have him destroy so many lives in my name." The doorbell rang, and Melissa stepped into the morning quiet of the house. The two friends looked at each other, understanding flowing between them like an unspoken current. They had both changed in ways that went beyond the surface, beyond the simple narratives of justice and betrayal. "The FBI wants to talk to you," Melissa said softly. "But that's not why I'm here." Linda nodded, leading her friend to the garden patio where they had spent so many teenage summers dreaming of their futures. The morning light painted everything in shades of possibility. "I've been reading the responses," Linda said, her voice steady. "So many people coming forward, sharing similar stories. It's like we've lanced a wound in the corporate world, letting the poison drain away." Melissa placed a folder on the table between them. "These are letters. From families your father hurt, but also from employees at Hamilton Enterprises. They're not angry, Linda. They're grateful. You've given them permission to speak their truth, to reclaim their own stories." The weight of years seemed to lift from Linda's shoulders as she read through the letters. Stories of loss and resilience, of people rebuilding their lives piece by piece. One former employee wrote, "You showed us that it's never too late to choose a different path." "The company's future is uncertain," Linda acknowledged, but there was no regret in her voice. "The board's appointing an interim CEO while we untangle the legitimate business from the fraud. But here's what they don't understand: I'm not walking away. I'm walking toward something better." She pulled out a business plan she'd been working on in secret. "Remember Edward Reeves? We're creating a foundation, funded by my personal assets and whatever we can recover. Not just for restitution, but for rebuilding. Small business grants, mentorship programs, legal support for corporate accountability." Melissa studied her friend's face, seeing not the weight of guilt but the light of purpose. "You're not just making amends," she realized. "You're transforming the narrative." "Every story has power," Linda replied, echoing the lessons they'd learned in high school journalism class. "But the most powerful stories are the ones that show us who we can become." The morning deepened around them as they talked, not as journalist and source, but as two women who had discovered their own kinds of courage. Linda's phone buzzed again, the FBI arriving at her office, the beginning of a long process of disclosure and accountability. "Are you ready?" Melissa asked, though she already knew the answer. Linda stood, smoothing her jacket with the same precision she'd once used to hide her father's crimes. But now that precision served a different purpose, not concealment, but clarity. "I spent 20 years being ready to defend my father's legacy," she said. "Now I'm ready to build my own." As they walked through the garden one last time, Linda paused by her mother's roses. With deliberate care, she cut one perfect bloom, placing it in a vase beside her father's note. Some legacies needed to end so that others could begin. The media would call it a scandal, a betrayal, a fall from corporate grace. But for the two women who had found their way back to truth and friendship, it was simply the next chapter in a story about choosing who you want to be, about the quiet strength it takes to rewrite your own narrative. In the end, it wasn't about the millions recovered or the careers destroyed. It was about the moment Linda chose to step into her own light, and the friend who helped her find the way. The truth had indeed set them free, not with a bang but with the steady courage of hearts finally beating to their own rhythm.